What's going on, everyone? Welcome to a new week of Littleroot Lessons Deep Dives. So, as always, I am Carter Noble, and I'm filling in this week for Carl because we figured we were going to try something new this week. So, this week I'm going to be covering Eternatus and Serena, both mons that I have a ton of experience with in the current format and in past formats, especially when it comes to Serena. So let's just get to it today. So today we're going to be talking about Eternatus, the gigantic space dragon demon thing that, the thing we have going on here. So Eternatus has a couple different roles when it comes to actually using a restricted slot. It's able to really be super defensive with like Cosmic Power recover sets, or because it has base 145 special attack and 130 speed, it can be really hyper offensive in a lot of various teams as well. So we're going to be taking a look at both of those to be able to see exactly what it can do today. In Series 8, Eternatus wasn't very popular. I think it was at like 0.3% of usage on Showdown, thanks to Picolytics data here. That's where all of our information for today is coming from. So it was really commonly paired with Gigantamax Lapras and like Grimmsnarl, or various screen setters, so that it could just be this defensive wall. It's really similar in the vein to Zacian, because it was able to threaten Dynamaxed Pokemon with Dynamax Cannon, while it itself is not able to Dynamax. So it's something very similar to Zacian and Zamazenta in that regard, with Behemoth Blade and Behemoth Bash, where it does double damage to Dynamax Pokemon while still being able to not only be a stab attack for them, so they can be able to do a ton of damage to non-Dynamax targets as well. So in the current format, so Series 10, there's a lot of different cores that you see built around Eternatus. You love seeing it next to like Celesteela and Tapu Fini, because both of them provide very good defensive pivots. If you have an opposing Eternatus or something like that on the opposing side that's going to go for a dragon attack, you can switch to your Fairymon. If they're going for ground coverage, you can switch to your Celesteela. So there's a lot of interesting things that you have, interesting pivots that you get to pair with Eternatus. On top of that, you get to play with Rillaboom, and to another extent, Tapu Bulu, because Eternatus loves the recovery that grassy terrain provides. I'm not exactly sure why there's a ton of Urshifu's paired with it, but specifically Water Urshifu, there's a ton of it next to Eternatus. And then Ditto actually makes a lot of sense next to Eternatus, because you're trying to most likely build this gigantic wall. So being able to eventually switch in Ditto and copy your opponent's restricted mon, so now you're being able to apply a ton of pressure while also providing a mon that they just cannot actually deal with in Eternatus. So I saw that today. I'm just like, man, that actually makes a ton of sense, and not something I think you can actually say about a lot of the other mons in the format, is that Ditto makes actually a really good partner. So going down to exactly what Eternatus does, looking at common moves here, we see Flamethrower. Flamethrower actually is really good coverage. When you actually look at Eternatus's coverage moves, you have Flamethrower and Mystical Fire. So like if you need to be this defensive pivot, you can, or this defensive like wall that just whittles down your opponent's stats with Mystical Fire, you can. Of course, recover Cosmic Power, which we've kind of talked about already, so that you are just unkillable. Sludge Bomb for good stab damage. Dynamax Cannon, I'm not exactly sure why this has such high usage, other than that it's base 100 accuracy move. Seeing how there's no Dynamax in this format, you're not getting that benefit, quote-unquote benefit, from Dynamaxing. But it still is really good coverage. But if you're looking to do offensive Eternatus things, I'm a big fan of Draco Meteor, just because sure, you have that 10% chance to miss, but you're doing 20% more damage. So personally, I'm a big fan of Draco Meteor over Dynamax Cannon and over Eterna Beam. That's another one that I've seen popping up on Eternatus's, and I'm not really a fan of. Of course, you have Meteor Beam to pair with your Power Herb. Not really surprised to see that both of those are at exactly 13% usage. Black Sludge makes a ton of sense just because you want to be able to wall up and get extra recovery as much as possible. Personally, these leftovers users should probably switch to Black Sludge just so on these teams that you have Eternatus, you can have it a second leftovers essentially. And it might be that, you know, they have like a Moongus or something on these teams and their Black Sludge is already taken up on that slot. Weakness Policy is actually really interesting in this current format. It's not something that a lot of Mons can actually utilize, but Eternatus makes sense because, you know, it has base like 130 HP, I believe. I'm gonna double check my math on that. Just gotta confirm. Yeah, 140 HP. I was close. But, you know, both of your defenses are 95 as well, so you can take a decent hit from, like, your partner Pokemon if you do, like, a Bulldoze or something like that to trigger your policy. Granted, you are going to drop your speed in that instance, but you're also dropping both of your opponent's speed as well. So getting to trigger your policy on turn is going to +2 on that special attack just makes it where you're going to be able to pick up a ton of KOs. And then lastly, a couple other items I want to touch here on is Rocky Helmet and Grassy Seed. Both of these actually make a ton of sense, and I'm actually a fan of both of them. Rocky Helmet, just so you can, things like specifically Dark Urshifu is going to hit you, break its sash, and then you're just going to click recover and recover all that damage back that it did. So sure that you may have a bad matchup on paper against Urshifu because it always crits you and crits through your Cosmic Power boost, but at the end of the day, you do have that base 140 HP to be able to live a ton of hits. So Rocky Helmet makes a ton of sense and I'm a big fan of it. Haven't tested it personally, but it's a really cool idea. And then Grassy Seed, just because you are pairing this with Rillaboom or Tapu Bulu a ton of times, it makes sense to just have that passive +1 defense. Personally, I'm not a fan of it over something like Black Sludge in that instance, but getting a free +1 to your defense makes for a much harder Pokemon to kill. Moving right along here, we are going to talk about how to actually build Eternatus. So, obviously, you know, we've talked about common partners and everything else with it, but it really depends on what you're trying to do with your Eternatus. If your team has a lot of offensive pressure already, you're able to make it where this can be a defensive mon. If you're lacking that offensive pressure, you can slap a Life Orb or a Power Herb on this and make this your offensive threat that comes in the late game and picks up KOs. So it really just depends on what your team needs. Eternatus kind of can fit a lot of roles depending on what you need it to. So, of course, if you're building offensive, you might want that redirection just so you can able to fire off multiple meteor beams so you can get that passive +1 to your special attack every time. And then if you're building it to be defensive, of course you want to pair it with flying and fairy types so you can, and really anything that resists the damage that Eternatus doesn't like to see. So, of course, water types fit that as well because you're going to have a ton of ice moves coming your way. So that's why Feeney's a really good partner. And honestly, that might be why Urshifu is so high in the partner usage. Is it just resists all these ice attacks that are coming at you. But I haven't seen a lot of ice coverage in this format, so it's just something to keep in mind for the future when building with Eternatus. So these are actual sets. This top set here with the Black Sludge is the actual set I've been playing with on my my Eternatus. So 252 HP, 4 defense, 4 special defense, 188 speed puts you at just enough speed to outspeed base 120s. Which you are 130, so you're going to be able to do a ton there. Unfortunately, you're not able to outspeed things like Zacian or Calyrex Shadow, so those are threats that you need to be prepared for. But if you get into a position well enough, you can set up in front of them and just not care. Of course, you have Cosmic Power, Protect, Recover, and Sludge Bomb on this set that I've been using. It might be concerning not having fire coverage to be able to deal with the steel types in the format, specifically like Zacian and Kartana are two mons that I've seen a ton of. Celestial is another one that you just kind of need to be able to deal with. But you also have multiple other mons on your team to be able to deal with them. And end of the day, you have Pressure as your only ability, so you can just stall them out while clicking Protect and Recover and gaining back all this HP passively through Black Sludge and grassy terrain to make it where eventually they just struggle themselves and KO themselves. Of course, these other two sets, we have Life Orb and Power Herb here. This Life Orb set I have made max special attack, not max speed, just because we are modest max special attack, as opposed to the Power Herb set, which is timid max special attack. So the big difference here is because Power Herb is going to give you that +1 when you do click Meteor Beam, you're going to be able to do essentially more damage than you would with Life Orb. So you need that extra oomph on this modest set to be able to take you over the edge. I'm a big fan of all of these sets. It really just comes down to what you need on your team to be able to adequately fill that role. So, end of the day, how do you actually beat Eternatus? One of the best ways that I found is ignoring it and targeting down its partners to force Eternatus into a 2v1 situation, which can be done, but in most situations like that, because you are going to be able to do so much more damage than what they are able to dish out or recover, you eventually will win those end games. There's of course other iterations of that. Specifically for the defensive variants, phasing them out through Whirlwind or Dragon Tail or Roar so that they don't get their Cosmic Power set up is a good way of doing it. Taunting them with something like Whimsicott or Tornadus is another way so that they just can't set it up. Knockoff or Burn is another way of dealing with them in the short term, because especially Knockoff specifically, if you go for a Knockoff, they're no longer carrying their Black Sludge, and eventually you're going to be able to chip them down so where they're not passively recovering every turn thanks to Protect and Black Sludge. If you are facing down the offensive variants, stuff like Snarl and Parting Shot are really good in that situation, just because you need to be able to take a hit to be able to get them off, but if you're able to, then their damage output is going to significantly decrease over time. So, end of the day, Eternatus is super underutilized in my opinion for Series 10. It benefits really well from the player being able to identify and play around things in the format. You need to know what bad matchups there are. Specifically stuff like Landorus Incarnate can be a problem if you don't play the match appropriately, but that's why you have teammates to be able to not only pivot appropriately, but also deal with these threats that actually deal with Eternatus. If phasing moves such as Roar and Whirlwind do pick up thanks to the popularity of Xerneas, being able to set up your Eternatus could be a problem, and therefore you might see an uprise of offensive variants instead. So, end of the day, I'm a huge fan of Eternatus in this current format, and I would highly recommend you check it out and play with it yourself. So, that is going to be it for me today, everyone. Thank you so much for watching, and like, comment, subscribe, and we'll be back later in this week with some more deep dives. Have a good one, everyone. Peace.